Being a good business owner is much less about having good business knowledge and much more about your ability to withstand things that make you really uncomfortable. I always tell people who are just getting started, your first goal is to go get a client. What I found with Showit is that it gives you the most creative freedom without having to bang your head against the wall, trying to wrestle with code or finally give up and just hire a developer to do it for you. You get on there, you move something, and it actually goes where you want it to. The truth is, people don't read websites. Think back to the last website that you visited. You scanned it. Even as a web designer, this is hard to admit, your copy and your messaging is much more important than how your website looks. And so what are the words that we can put on here to really motivate people to say yes to you?
I love what you're doing. So why don't you give our audience a little insight as to what your business is and kind of maybe a little backstory into what led you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go backstory first. About 8 years, maybe longer or so, I actually was in the music industry. So I wrote and produced songs. I worked at a church as a worship pastor, and I was at a songwriting conference. And one of the songwriters that I look up to said, there is no middle class in the music industry. And I was like, okay, wait a second. So you either are Jay-Z or you make nothing. And that essentially was what he was trying to say. And I was like, all right, I don't think I can sustain that with a family. And so that's when I started building websites and learning how to build websites for other people, learning design, learning development. I did that as a side hustle for a long time. But then right around 2019, I was like, what if we kind of switch this? What if we make web design, web development my full-time gig, and then I can still do music on the side, which I still do, but that's a little bit more of a sustainable model for me with 4 kiddos. So that's what I did. And pretty shortly after that, I started noticing that there were a lot of people who were like, hey, how did you do that? Can you show me how you did that? And so that turned into building a platform to educate people how to go from not knowing anything about websites, web design, UX design, or development to becoming full-fledged web design agency business owners. And so that's called Self-Made Web Designer. And I also work for a company called Showit. That's my full-time job, which is the drag and drop website builder. So long answer to maybe somewhat of a simple conclusion.
No, it's a loaded question. To find out how somebody got to where they are right now in a very succinct amount of time is impossible. So you did a great job. And I love hearing your
Thank you.
background. Yeah. My husband was actually professionally trained as a singer, and he didn't have that exact same feedback, but he kind of saw the writing on the wall. I do feel like we've shifted a little more with the advent of TikTok and social media being a little different. I think we're creating that middle class of musician lifestyle. However, I do think that it was good advice to just kind of recognize, what does this industry really require? Do you want that? And it's a question all of us have to ask ourselves when we're building anything. How far are you willing to go? What are you willing to sacrifice for the other components of your life? So I'm glad that you found a path that was a little more sustainable and allowed you to honor the other pieces of who you are, being a father, having a family. And I think everybody listening can appreciate that. And we all get to make that choice of how deep are we willing to get into this. And so, yeah, I love that you found success in the design world. It's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. Looking back, in terms of the music industry, if you approach what you're doing like a business and think of it in more entrepreneurial terms, like I've seen some people really thrive, who don't necessarily have a huge following and their songs aren't getting 1 million downloads every
Mhm.
single day. So you're right. Like I wasn't willing to do what it took because it's a lot of effort, a lot of living in ambiguity, nobody knowing. You just kind of putting coins into a slot machine that just never returns until one day you finally hit the jackpot. And so, I had a little bit more urgency on making some money. So that's why I went the path that I did.
Amazing. And some could argue that's entrepreneurship in a nutshell, in many ways. Like, I think you found a lower risk opportunity, but do you find that you've kind of had the same scenario? Or what did you do to make that a little less risky and start generating revenue soon instead of, kind of having the same gamble that a lot of us feel like we are doing when we're starting businesses or starting as freelancers?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the answer to that goes back to the nature of the product. So, in terms of being a musician, the product is the songs that you're producing. Of course, there are all other sorts of things that you could do in terms of being a musician, being in the music industry, and I've seen it done really well in certain ways. But that product is easier and easier to produce these days, and people are less and less willing to spend a lot of money on it. And so, you know, I looked at that and then I looked at, well, there could be much more margin inside of a website, especially a website that like really helps a business. You can go on to almost any web building platform and make a fairly decent website on your own and have it up and running within 24 hours to 3 or 4 days. I just did a video where I tested 4 AI web design tools, and then I tried to build the same web page and to see who made the best web design or who made the best homepage. And so it was pretty interesting. But suffice it to say, and I think this will always be the case, a really good website that actually works for you, that focuses on conversion, that actually it like lends itself to helping your bottom line is something that is worth the money and will always be something that takes a lot of skill and effort to dial in, and honestly a lot of testing and iterations over and over and over again. So that was kind of the thought process of like, all right, this is something every business needs. I'm really good at figuring out how things work and figuring out how to make things better for folks who have their own website. And so this just seems like the better option for me at this point in time. So that was kind of the thought behind it.
Yeah, and it worked out really well. And I love that you kind of touched on AI. And I have to agree with you. And as you were saying that, I was thinking it's kind of the difference between having four walls and having a house. I've seen what AI can do. It can really create something quickly. And I think that there's benefit there, even as a web designer, to be able to shortcut some of the pieces that took you longer. And there's always going to be a need for that human touch, that understanding of what we're actually trying to accomplish here. And there definitely are companies that just need kind of the placeholder. And then I think there's definitely other industries that need something a little more intricate, intentional. So for you, let's kind of talk through this on if somebody were to become a successful web designer, you obviously teach on this. Let's just kind of give the 101 class on how people want to get started. And maybe you even want to touch on the platform, Showit. You work for them. Is that still, I mean, I know you'd probably be not a great employee if you advocated for anything else, but kind of give us a rundown of why. Because I said before we started recording, I am a longtime user of Showit. It started as a platform for photographers mostly. So it's very visual and it's so user friendly. Everybody I talk to, I'm like, why are you on Wix? Why are you on this? Get on
Yeah.
Showit. So maybe start us there with platform, why you love that one. And then let's kind of get into how people can replicate success in this industry.
Yeah, yeah. And first off, like, even though I do have a vested interest in the success of Show It, I also know that, there are a whole bunch of different needs out there for websites and businesses. And Show It has always been really focused on a specific type of business owner that really values the way that it looks, the way their website looks. So they want their brand to match how they show up online. And so that's always kind of been the North Star that has pointed us to how we build things, what we add as features, but before getting hired at Showit, I was a WordPress user. I built all my websites on WP Bakery and it worked fine for me at the time. I did some Elementor. And so, it all really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But what I found with Showit is that it certainly gives you the most creative freedom without having to bang your head against the wall and trying to wrestle with code or like finally give up and just hire a developer to do it for you.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is that it integrates into WordPress. And so you're not necessarily like into our ecosystem and only able to use our point of sale tools, e-commerce, membership components, anything and everything that you could think of wanting to do on your website can be done because there's probably a WordPress plugin for it out there somewhere. And
Yeah.
so that's why I really like it because it really enables business owners to do a lot more with their website without having to, keep signing up for different features that are included in the base package, so to speak.
Yeah. And as someone who dabbled in all those things you just said, I built websites, using Elementor, using WP Bakery. Like, I think it does get to a point where there's just a frustration. And unless you want to do this professionally and build websites all the time and become really good at it, I also think the appeal of Show It is if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I just kind of want to design a really nice looking website for myself. And I don't really want to do this again and again, but I want to be able to get in there and tweak and make new pages and create a sales page. I'm embarrassed about how many pages I have in my Showit account. I get the alert every time I create a new one.
Yep.
You've exceeded 100. You probably should cut back. But it is so user friendly and incredible for just the layperson to be able to go make a website. And so I can see how, as a designer too, somebody who's new and is like, hey, let me see if I could do this. I have a creative eye. I want to navigate something that works. It could be probably one of the most favorite tools to use. Obviously, your audience needs to match that same priority of wanting a visually stunning website where that's a priority. But from a designer standpoint, I'm sure you found I can get something out there so much quicker because I'm not frustrated by the boxy, code driven website builder. So, yeah, just talk us through a little bit of how that's helped you as a designer to be able to put out more work.
Yeah. And what you're saying, we found so many people who they started as something else, so they had a photography business, or they had some other type of service-based business, and they went on Showit to make their own website. And then somebody asked them like, "Hey, can you build me one that looks like yours or looks as good as yours?" And then slowly but surely, web design became their full-time thing. And so it's really interesting how empowering it feels, and I try to be cautious with this because obviously I love the platform. I am a little biased, but when I first started using it, and what I've heard from so many other people is, like, you really feel a huge sense of freedom when you get on there and you move something and it actually goes where you want it to.
Yeah.
Versus like, okay, I've got 4 boxes that I can put something in, and then if I want something else, I either have to code it, or I have to get some type of add-on, or I just have to be okay with it not looking perfect on all screen sizes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it certainly is more of a visually appealing platform, and it feels a lot like the tools that designers use already. And so because of that, it's a no-brainer for folks who that would kind of describe who you are and what you do.
hmm I tell people it's like being able to make your website on Canva, but better. It's that
Yeah.
same user experience where you have more control, more power on how it looks, and then it comes together beautifully. And so, then as a designer who is putting out things, you obviously have a little more creative freedom. But I also love the power to templatize. And even when I've built websites for other people or built sales pages for people, it's nice to have a couple options where just within my account, I can build that out and then I can share the key. I don't have to necessarily go start a whole account, build everything from scratch. They're not paying for something until it's done and ready to use it. Is that kind of how you've also leveraged the platform as a designer?
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime I'm working with a client, I always start in my own account and then create an export, which then I get to put into the client's account. But then on the other side of that, we have some agencies that they don't do any client work.
Mm.
It's only selling templates, and they're $1 million agencies, and then on the other side of things, there's like solopreneurs who are making multiple 6 figures, and they've created maybe 6 or 7 templates,
Yeah.
so it's a really empowering thing. And that's one of the cool things about Showit that I hadn't seen on any other web building platform. Like, if you look at some of the other popular ones like Webflow or Wix, even Elementor, the templates that they're selling are 50 to maybe $100, versus the price point for Showit templates is much, much higher.
Mm.
We regularly have templates sell for a few $1,000s, and people are just willing to buy them because of the freedom that it gives them and because of how perfect it is for their business. So
Yeah.
it's really in a unique space when it comes to all the other options.
hmm Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about structure, maybe even in how you have personally done it, because I think you could build your business just doing custom work. Like you said, you can have an agency that sells just templates. So, in the world of being a website designer, what are some of the things that you've incorporated in different pricing tiers? Because there's different needs for different markets. So, yeah, maybe just
Yeah,
break down kind of how you've done it and then some other things that you've seen people do that you would, but you're, staying
sure.
in your lane.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I haven't been able to go the template route because that would be, like a little bit of breach between Showit and I,
Right.
because part of my job is to create free templates.
Okay. Yeah. So you're a
Eh,
little
eh,
constrained there.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I can't say, like, so much of my client work is just one on one. It's very custom. I do a much higher price point for my websites because it's not just the web design, it's going to be strategy, it's going to be SEO, it's going to be tailoring your messaging, it's going to be conversion based optimization, it's going to be all those things just because that's what I found moves the needle the most with clients is I could get you a pretty website and it might do better or it might not. But if we focus on these things, I for sure know that you will at some point see a shift and you'll start to see some traction on your website. And so that's kind of why I've gone that route. And, custom bespoke websites, they'll be anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000,
Mhm.
depending on, what you want and everything that you would want to be included. Underneath that, we have folks who they just do template customization. And so a client buys a template and then they come to them and say, "Hey, I thought I was going to have time to do this. I don't have time. Can you customize it for me?" And, that's their bread and butter. And I will say, despite that, they're still making $1,000 to $3,000, sometimes more than that,
Mhm.
depending on how busy they are and how much their demand is. But, like we have some folks who do website in a day, website in a week, and it's all based on templates. And so, they're making $1,000 in one day and they do 6 or 7 of those every single month. And that's all they have to do. So they're working 7 days on actually building websites. Of course, there's marketing and customer connection and acquisition and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but it's not a huge lift. And then on the other side of that, there's the kind of the template, side of things where, folks are selling a myriad of different types of templates. And really what I've seen work the best, because I actually at Showit oversee the designer community. And so I'm talking to people who have those $1 million template shops. And I'm like, okay, tell me, how are you as successful as you are versus all the other people that are saying it's really hard? And oftentimes it comes down to really focusing in on a specific niche and figuring out exactly what that ideal customer avatar is looking for. And it's funny because like I was looking at the downloads in our template store because if you have a certain connection with us, you can put your templates on our store and you can sell those templates on your own website. We
Mm.
kind of encourage you to sell them on your own website. The store is, there's hundreds of different templates. And so it's getting more and more difficult to stand out. But
Yeah.
the ones that are the highest performing are hardly ever the ones that you look at and you go, wow, that's really impressive. But the reason why they perform so well is because the designer figured out exactly what the person who would be willing to pay for that template is actually looking for, and they dialed it into a T. And of course, that's true in all of entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
business and life.
Yeah. Well, and let's kind of get into the nitty-gritty with that a little bit because I'm thinking about templates that I'm drawn to and what I'm willing to spend money on versus take the time, even though I know how to use the platform, right? And so sometimes it's an aesthetic, sometimes it's the messaging is already there. What else have you found that they've really targeted and dialed into that helps them find those ideal buyers that are just ready right now? And is their whole kind of template shop built around that where they're only serving one type of customer and then they just have variations of that?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So I love something that a guy named Davy Jones said. He actually is a Showit user. He's got an agency, but he also runs a sister company of ours called Bedow, which is like a pop-up and lead generation tool. And he said the main thing that people are asking when they look at a website is, can you do that for someone like me?
Mm,
And so the best thing that you can do is figure out how the ideal customer avatar will be able to see themselves in the template that you're creating. And so that goes for absolutely everything. It's instead of putting lorem ipsum in text, write headers, write copy that speaks to them, try to figure out what words they have in their own websites and then mimic that back to them because everybody's when they visit a website, they're looking for what's called micro yeses. And
mm,
so those are little bitty, yeah, I can feel that. That makes sense to me. Or I've experienced that. I've felt that. Or, hey, that image looks like an image that I would want to put on my website. And so that's where I've seen a lot of the templates do really well is, can somebody see themselves in that template and then take out all of the creative effort that they would have to do if you didn't include, if you just had like really bad stock photos, or if you just had lorem ipsum, or if you had a bad color palette, because all of that takes creative work. And this is actually something that I got from music when I was songwriting. Like I would show friends songs who were also songwriters, and if they didn't like it, I would say, "Oh, you got to wait until I put strings in, until there's a cello, until there's a
Mm,
violin." And so it's like I have something in my head that sounds awesome, but they don't have the same reference. And sometimes people just don't have the willingness to put the creative energy into going, "All right, I think I could adjust this, and I think I can move that, and it's going to work really well." Like they need to see it like, "Oh, all I'm going to have to do is change out the text a little bit, and this is going to be ready to go." And so those
yeah.
are the ones that I've seen perform really well.
Yeah, because people are doing that because they don't really wanna have to try that hard. They don't have to work that hard. I had kind of a similar conversation, totally different context, with content and how you gotta get straight to the point because people do not want to do the mental work to try and figure out what you're talking about, and so the same goes for
Yes.
just that visual representation. If you're selling a template, it needs to feel like I can truly plug and play and be able to be up and going and have my website running and doing what it needs to do quickly because that's part of the appeal and not going and building yourself and also not spending thousands to be able, to hire somebody to do something fully custom. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're totally right. And then let's kind of stay in the template zone just a little bit longer. You mentioned
Sure.
some of those people that are doing absolutely amazing. Do they have a ton of templates or are they kind of zoning in on some hero things and are they rolling out new things all the time or do they now just spend a ton of time on marketing and getting in front of their ideal customer?
Yeah, so there's kind of two models to this, and I think that's probably true in a lot of businesses. There is the low output, high price, and then there's high output, low price. And so the folks who are charging $1,000, $2,000 for a template, they don't have a ton to choose from. I
Mhm.
think they have a library of somewhere between 10 and 20, which might sound like a lot, but this is over a decade plus of building these templates.
Yeah.
And a lot of them will go back and redo certain templates because it doesn't make sense anymore in the context of our current reality. And then there's the folks who they're not necessarily going for the folks who would be willing to pay, thousands of dollars a template. They're looking for somebody who just needs a decent looking website online and isn't afraid to spend 100, maybe 200 bucks. And so I've
Mm.
actually seen some people be really successful with that and putting their templates on different markets where that type of buyer is actually actively looking at, like Creative Market or Etsy. And so it's like, hey, you could buy this for $1,000, or you could buy something that will probably work for you for, 75 bucks, 200 bucks, And so at that point, it's much more of like a volume
Mhm.
type of play where you just have to keep churning out websites. And the same is true with like custom websites for clients. If you're able to do 20 websites in a month, like you don't have to charge nearly as much as the person who it's going to take maybe 2 or 3 months to finish one website, because it's so involved and so detailed.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously great at what you do to be able to. So let's shift into kind of your focus because you are doing more of those bespoke websites. You have a pretty strong base for design. And then as you get into those other layers, what does that look like? Are you doing all of that? What's the customer experience like? How long does it usually take you to work on a website? You kind of mentioned the range of price point, obviously, depending on the depth and how many add ons they include. But yeah, just kind of walk us through a little bit of your process and how you facilitate the delivery of that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It all really depends on the client and what their needs are, and honestly, what their budget is. So, my first interaction with the client isn't like, how much can I sell you for? It's like, hey, what do you think you would feel comfortable spending?
Hmm.
And then from there, we backtrack and say, okay, at that price point, you would get this. Is that going to fit all the needs that you have? And then they have the ability to say yes or no, or I'd like to add this. And then we can talk about, okay, if we add these things, then it's going to be this much. So that's always my approach. I'm fortunate to not have to to worry about my income through web design. So it's much more of I get to work on a few projects every year because I reserve some time for it. And typically it's stuff I'm kind of excited about doing. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the person who can pay me the most.
Right. Yeah.
And so, that being said, because I have really bad ADHD, I've always been interested in like everything that surrounds anything that I'm doing. And so when I started getting into the web design world, it was like, all right, it's not just making things look pretty. There's much more to it to have a successful website. It's learning how to set up e-commerce. It's, learning how to make custom plugins if you're on WordPress. It's learning how to craft messaging. It's really dialing in the SEO. And in our world, it's dialing in the AI engine optimization, So, you know, I started following a whole bunch of different rabbit trails and would just dive in headlong for, a solid period of time until I was like, all right, I feel like I know this stuff. And I would do it for myself first on my own websites to get my own experience and say, like, all right, here's the things that didn't work because it was just theory. Here's the things that work in a practical sense. And then I bring that back to my client. And I have a couple of folks that work with me on different things. So I'm not necessarily doing quite as much as I used to do. But some of the more impactful things, like I've actually learned, even as a web designer, this is hard to admit, that your copy and your messaging is much more important than how your website looks.
Mm.
And so that's kind of been my shift of focus lately to say, what are the words that we can put on here to really motivate people to say yes to you? And so, um, like that, if for better or worse, is kind of where I'm spending my time is really the psychology of a buyer and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Well, to give you some credit though, even though copy is probably more important than the color palette, there's still value in understanding how to place copy, how to make it visually guided.
100%.
Because I'm the type of person that will either be very text heavy and I just want to say all the things and it's not really flowing. I'm not really creating a conversation on that website or that sales page. So there is value in understanding how to use your design background and create that flow for people. So, you know,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think there's
the
value.
truth is that people don't read websites, Think back to the last website that you visited. You scanned it, right?
Yeah.
Like you went down and just kind of lightly scrolled. You weren't engaging. And this goes back to we all by nature are trying to reserve as much energy in our lives for the important stuff.
Yeah.
And reading a website from top to bottom is very low on the list of importance.
Yep.
And so what you're trying to do is trying to visually lay out things that actually make it easier for a user to engage who's just scanning. And so some of that is visual hierarchy, like putting things in such a way that, you can instantly tell when you look at a section, this is the important thing. These things aren't so much as important. And then here's something that's maybe a little bit more important. And that all has to do with size and proportions and contrast. And of course, we can get into long conversations about the theory behind, getting someone's attention. But suffice it to say, yeah, there's a lot to it. And I kind of put both of those in the same field, because when I'm writing with the idea of how this is visually going to capture somebody's attention.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of walk through this because we've hit on a few important points. If somebody was wanting to step in and become a web designer, they want to build websites and they want to maybe go one path or the other. Maybe they want to do more templatized. And I think a lot of times it flows into other things. You start with one direction and then realize, you know what? I don't want to do custom sites all the time. Let's templatize. Let's just sell these to the masses. But let's just kind of talk through the journey of this. What are some of the first things they need to do? Obviously, we have to have some design expertise. So, do you recommend just getting into picking a provider, whether that's Showit or another one, and just starting to build your own website, creating something that can demonstrate? And then from there, how do you start getting clients? How do you start acquiring people? That's always the number one question with service provider
Yeah.
businesses, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I actually approach this from somewhat of a different angle. I always tell people who are just getting started, your first goal is to go get a client.
Hmm.
And so that sounds really scary because a lot of people, they're like, oh my gosh, but what if they need something and that I can't give them? And then I'm stuck in this situation and then they're frustrated by me and I disappoint them. And so, my caveat is you need to be honest about your skills and where you're at. Don't say that you're going to build them a $20,000 website when you've never built a website, you know? And this is actually what I did when I first got started. Like, I didn't necessarily go to a platform and like, let's learn how to build this thing. I just started talking to people in my network, friends, family, friends of friends, anybody who I could think of that had a business or was connected to somebody that had a business. And I recruited them as my referral army. And this was like a little bit of relational equity from investing a lot into people, you know, as a pastor. And so, you know, most of them were 100% willing to make those connections for me.
Mhm.
And so, lo and behold, somebody heard through someone else that I was building websites and her website was down and she needed my help. And so that kind of guided my path was like, okay, I found the need. Now, how do I meet this need? You know, and so that's what I say, go get a client first. Some of the objections, you know, well, what if I don't know anybody that needs a website? First of all, you probably do. You just haven't been thinking in this vein for a long enough time. You know, like
Mhm.
I compare it to when I first got a vehicle, I had a Nissan Pup. It was this really bad pickup truck that Nissan made, diesel. I don't even think they make it anymore. The passenger side door didn't open. And so anytime I took somebody on a date, they had to crawl through the driver's side. It was awesome. But like when I first started driving this thing, I was like, okay, who else in the world drives this god awful vehicle? And then as I got out and started driving, I was like, oh, wow, there are a lot of people who drive this god awful vehicle. And that's kind of like you find what you're looking for. If you're looking for something, then it's going to be there. But if you haven't been looking for it, it's going to feel like it's not there. But that's only just because you haven't been paying attention.
Yeah.
And so once you start paying attention, you'll find that more opportunities open up. And then if that is the case, if you've exhausted your network and you've reached out to every single person that you know, and you still can't find somebody, then it's time to start building your network even bigger. Like
Mhm.
you need to get out there and you need to make more friends and you need to meet more people. It probably needs to be physical. It needs to be in person. You know, like we've got a designer on Showit. She goes to 14 networking events every single month.
Wow. I thought you were gonna
But
say every year, and that was a lot, but every month.
no,
Wow.
and you talk to her and you're like, oh, you're not like a multi six figure agency owner, you know, like you would never know it, but she is. She just is pounding pavement every single month, meeting new people, connecting with people she's already met.
Wow.
You know, because a website, it's a big lift. If you're going to change your website, if you're going to change your platform, especially if your entire business kind of runs on your website or hinges on the sales that you make from that website. And so oftentimes it takes a few conversations to actually bring somebody to the point where they say, all right, yeah, I think I'm ready to do this thing.
Hmm.
And so anyway, going back, that's step one. And then from there, it's like on the job training. You know, you learn as you go. And what I always say is don't necessarily dive deep into courses at the very beginning. Get courses as you have an actual project that you need whatever the course is talking about.
Hmm.
Because what happens with courses, you sign up for them, you have no context for what you're learning. You just know, all right, here's the theory of everything that everybody's talking about. But that knowledge doesn't get solidified because you're not going back and actually using what you've learned. And so if you approach it this way, if you say, okay, I actively have this project that needs this thing, here's this course, then you can contextualize that information and it becomes much more ingrained in the long-term memory bank. And so that's kind of what I say. I know it's definitely different. And a lot of people, they're a little bit nervous when I say, go get a client first. And that's totally fine. Like a client doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's going to pay you money.
Hmm.
It just means somebody is willing to exchange something with you for something that you are giving them. Right.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't have to be money. It could be, so I know a guy, his name's Brad Hussey, he's another web design educator. Like his first website, somebody gave him some really nice clippers. And so he's had those clippers since day one, you know, but
Wow.
they're like $500, $600 clippers. And he's like, yeah, I'll do it for clippers. And so now obviously he's running a much bigger agency, you know, but like that first website that I built, they gave me $100 gift card to Amazon, right? You know, not a big deal, but it was something. It could even be like, hey, I'll do this for you, but I need 10 direct connections with people who need websites.
Hmm.
And so I need you to introduce me to 10 other people, and not just, hey, this is somebody, give them a call. No, I need you to make the handoff, because there has to be skin in the game for it to feel important. Or like I've seen a lot of times, like you say yes, and then you actually never do the thing because there's no accountability for you actually getting it done.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I actually don't feel like that's unconventional. Well, maybe it is unconventional advice, but I love it so much. And I think more entrepreneurs need to approach business this way. So I'm really glad that you spent so much time on the power of networking. My husband and I have realized that the times when we've had the leanest income is when we had spent too much time in the years prior being incredibly locked in, right? Like in
Yeah.
terms of not connecting with enough people. And it's something that I hope everybody listening understands. That is probably the number one driver. To this day, I still make money, gain clients, do so many things, public speaking endeavors, all because of work that I did to facilitate a network 10 years ago. I'm still reaping the fruit of that network that's continued to expand. And some of those connections literally go back to the very beginning when I started a podcast and started connecting with other people. So I know it can feel scary to think, oh, yeah, but like I have something, I need to make money, I need to sell. So shouldn't I be creating a sales page? Shouldn't I be out there marketing myself, when really the power of the network is so much more extensive and it's not a linear situation? But even to your point of get your first client, it's so easy to sit there and over perfect and create in a vacuum. And even along that line with buying a course, the course you're buying, they're literally teaching, sometimes if it's a broad spectrum, teach you how to be a web designer. You might even get super dialed in thinking I have to design in this way or I have to market to a specific client, and you're missing the mark on what's actually out there being needed right now and the people you could help, and maybe a whole niche of people that you would love to serve that this particular teacher doesn't serve. So you have no context for that either. I love everything you said about the networking and the course, consumption, because you do need context. So basically you're saying wait till you have a problem to solve it with education and with training. Don't go out there overloading your brain with things that are literally not even applicable to you yet. I think that is such sound advice. And if people even just do those two things, I'm like, okay, we're done. Wrap it up. You guys now know how to go be a business owner.
Yeah. It's so funny. And hear me, like I sell courses,
Hmm.
I have a vested interest in people buying my courses.
Right.
But I also know that people sign up for courses and the vast majority do not finish.
Yep.
It is just sad how much people will spend just to not use something.
Mm.
And so my encouragement is always, hey, make sure this is the right timing, not just the right course.
Hmm.
Like the right timing and the right course put together is an incredible combination. Without those two components, yeah, they might be good. And there have been some courses that I bought 10 years ago that like, oh, okay, I have this need now. So I'm going to go back and review some of those things.
Yeah.
But it just works much better. And it's so funny, I think because I've got a video where I talk about like 14 different methods to land web design clients. And I kind of go from the spectrum of hard to much easier. But people always want to go with the hard
Hmm.
because it feels like there's less social anxiety. So they're like, all right, I'm going to start cold DMing people or I'm going to start cold calling people. I'm like, okay, it can work, but you need to call like 1,000 people every single week. Do you understand the amount of lift that it's going to take? And then the amount of rejection that you're going to get? People don't like being cold called.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it works. I know people who have done it successfully. Gary Vee is a big proponent of just DM 1,000 people a day. Like, all right, it can work, but at what sacrifice,
Hmm.
versus going out and meeting people. And I think more and more as we get into the age of AI, those personal connections are going to mean a lot more.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's kind of the premise here of the show too, is learning by experience. So even as you saying, get out there and learn through experience, trial and error is so valuable. And I think it's exactly why we want to create this other lane where we go to college. A lot of people go to college to learn and then they don't even really have context. There's definitely classes I took that it took 10 years for me to be like, oh, I get it now because now I'm actually in the real world. I'm actually doing this thing. I'm, creating these connections. And so that communications class I took 20 years ago is now making a lot more sense. And so I think it's perfect alignment with our messaging of build something, start earning revenue. There is no better teacher than a customer, and, be willing to make the mistakes, be willing to muddle through it. So I think we've covered some really good ground in those core lessons. And I don't know if there's anything else you would add as you get going and as you start to build that out, what it's looked like. I think there's so many pathways that people can take in web design, but if you have any other, if you're continuing the masterclass, what are some key things that you would teach someone and make sure that they understood to be profitable and be really successful in this industry?
Yeah, yeah. So there are kind of two sides to the equation. There's the skill side, which is actually doing the thing. And then there's the business side. And really what you find is people are kind of either good at one or the other. And it's okay if you're not a super skilled web designer, but you're really good at making those connections, building your business, marketing yourself. And at the same time, it's okay if you're really good at the skill, but not necessarily good at the business. But if you're going to run an agency, you need to at least have a decent amount of knowledge in both of those areas. And so at that point, it's just about repetition.
Mhm.
It's about doing the thing over and over again, testing it out, see what works, see what doesn't, testing out a new idea, pivoting, changing, and then doing that over a long period of time. And you can't help but just get better and better. Like in terms of if you want to get better at the skills, you just need to be building a lot of websites. You
Mhm.
need to be designing all the time. You need to be developing all the time. You need to be in those website builders, actively being curious about what you can or can't do, becoming a student of other people's websites. So that's something I do all the time. I spend probably way too much time every day just looking at beautiful websites and then asking myself, like, if I were to do that, what would I do different?
Mm.
Or how did they do that? And how can I do that in my context?
Yeah.
And so, like, in the Showit designer community, I've become like Chris knows all the tricks kind of guy. And it's just because I'm curious,
Yeah.
like I see a website and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. How can I do that and show it? Because we don't have all the capabilities that they have. Like that's custom coded or that's on a different platform, but I can probably do something similar. And so that's really enabled me to kind of have a little bit more insight into, how to do certain things that other designers are like, oh, wow, did you custom code that? No, it's all within Showit. They're just using the Showit tools.
Mm.
And then on the business side, like a lot of that is going to come through the longevity. Like what I've found is being a good business owner is much less about having good business knowledge and much more about your ability to withstand things that make you really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So the sitting in that discomfort and just being willing to keep going despite, the anxiety attacks that you're daily having, despite like wondering like, all right, where's the money going to come from this month? Like you just keep going and you keep pushing. And if you're able to do that and not necessarily like kind of level down, like, okay, this is just as good as it's going to be for me. And that's fine. And for certain people, that's fine. For certain people, they're like, if I could make $100,000, $200,000 a year, I would be set.
Yeah.
And that's great. Those are lifestyle businesses. I love lifestyle businesses. I hope to one day have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not quite there yet. But, then there are people who are like, no, I want to keep going. And I think the thing you should ask yourself is, am I leveling down because I don't think it's possible? Or am I leveling down because this is what I want in life?
Mm.
And so if it's because you don't think that next level is possible, I would challenge that, right? Like you need to start pushing to figure out some different methods, like pivoting, trying different routes, trying different things. And then, of course, if you're like, this is the level of lifestyle I want to have, it becomes much more about not allowing yourself to get sucked into more and more, so
Mhm.
that you continually say, no, again, I love being here. I don't need to, yeah, I don't need to build 100 websites a year. Like I can have a handful of clients every year and I can make as much money as I need to keep me and my family comfortable.
Yeah. Man, applause from over here on my side of the conversation because that is essentially that's what I do. This is why I love coaching entrepreneurs and really focusing on that emotional intelligence layer. So many people lack that intention and understanding what do I even want to build? And it brings us full circle back to the beginning of the conversation. Build a business that you actually love that circulates around a life that you actually want to lead. And I love that you mentioned know whether this is a fear where you just don't think you can ascend versus an understanding of this is really where I want to be and this is the top of my game because it gives me the ability to have full comprehensive joy and have the relationships that I want and The income is really, really in a sweet spot and I'm really comfortable here. That is such sound advice. I hope everybody has gotten as much value from this conversation as I have. Thank you so very much for being willing to share everything that you have, how you've built success, how other people can follow in your footsteps. It's been truly so fun.
Kirsten, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Good. Amazing. Thanks. Okay, before we cut, will you show us a little demo of Showit because I am in love with it and I'm obsessed with it, but I would love for our, viewers, people who are watching on YouTube to kind of see it in action so they understand why I geek out over this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a template that I actually just built, and I did it for that YouTube video that I was talking about, where I go head to head with 4 other AI web design tools to see who wins
Mm.
on the design overall. So, here's the hero. So, on most website builders, you would have like 4 buckets that you'd be able to drop this into. But with Showit, if you want to move it a pixel up, it goes a pixel up. If you want to move it a pixel over, it goes a pixel over. And then obviously it has all the alignment tools within the builder to be able to make sure that things aren't like slightly off or angled weirdly. But, then in terms of the amount of elements that you can add on, what I say is if it has a WordPress plugin or an embed code, it can be used within Showit. So for example, let me just go to this site and I'll show you. Are you able to see this screen right here?
I can see the NeuroNest screen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So as I move my mouse, you'll kind of notice there's a little bit of follow with this gradient blob that's back here. And so all that is actually an embed from a third-party tool.
Wow.
And so you can see like I just have it embed here and it's just doing its magic. So this isn't necessarily like a native Showit thing, but because Showit has the ability to integrate with so many things, like you can throw stuff like that on there
Hmm.
and it still looks great and functions and it works like it should.
Cool. That's amazing. And then, yeah, maybe just show us like over to the side there, you can see you have all of these different pages on a site. You can add endless pages. You can clone things, right? So you don't have to start from scratch every single time you're building a page. You could take this page and maybe even mess around with it and not have to actually come back and fix what you didn't end up liking.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
why I have so many pages. I'm like, let's try another
100%.
variation.
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is that if you saw the Showit account of Showit,
Oh man.
like we get that warning every single time we publish and it's our platform. So, obviously that's more of a caveat than it is a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's things called site canvases. So if you know like a component or an element's going to be used over and over again. So maybe you have a specific lead magnet or like your header or your footer, like you don't want to be creating that from scratch every single time. And so you create site canvases just to kind of plug them in. And then the blog template is literally just setting things up. And I haven't even designed this, so it looks a little bit messy. The blog template is literally just setting things up to where it integrates within WordPress. So if you're familiar with the WordPress, like you really have to wrestle with it in order to make it look good on the design side of things. But within Showit, you just kind of get your blog to look how you want to look. And then it talks to WordPress, essentially becomes your WordPress theme, and then dynamically puts all the content in to whatever template you're building.
Hmm.
And, it just makes it so much more easier. This is the one thing that people have a little bit of a hard time understanding, but coming from a WordPress background, it's like anything and everything. I'm like, oh my God, this makes it so easy. And so like you'll see on a lot of the websites I build, I'll have custom post types. So if you don't just want to have a blog template, but you want to have a podcast template where you're adding podcasts instead of blogs because you want to keep those two things separately, you can create a custom post type
Hmm.
and then connect that to your podcast template. And then it just automatically works exactly how a blog would work, but you're keeping those things kind of separate. So it's a really empowering tool. And, like that's the whole thing is we want to cultivate the creativity that exists in each person. And so that's kind of the MO of where we head and why we do things.
Yeah. And a couple of things I want to point out since you have this pulled up is that you've got the mobile navigation on the left, you've got the desktop version on the right. I love that
Yes.
you guys have added the feature where you can kind of make it stick so you're not having to design both. But it is so
Yep.
nice to be able to just see that hand in hand. You can go, because I know that's the most infuriating thing is you're building a sales page on something like, I don't know, ClickFunnels or High Level, and then you have to go navigate and fix the mobile, and then it can mess up what's on the desktop. You can make things, move around and
Yeah.
be different on one versus the other and work with those in tandem. And then something else that saves a ton of time is your design settings, being able to go and preset your fonts, your colors, so you're not having to go and mess with that a lot. You'll just kind of have them there, and it
Yeah.
makes design so fast and so simple.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, as an example, like I have all my CTAs or my buttons green and they're connected to this color on my color palette. But if I wanted to change that to more of a blue, I could. And then when I save this, now all my buttons are blue. And so
Mhm.
I don't have to go back through and one at a time just make these look the way that I would want them to look. And some of that is like you have to create the design system and then don't make any adjustments unless it's absolutely necessary. Because once you make like a custom adjustment, like then you've got to go through and make those changes. But this makes it much easier to do all that. So,
Yeah.
it's super fun to start jumping in and using.
Cool. Thank you so much for demoing that. I just wanted people to see it in real time. It might even look overwhelming if you've never navigated it, but it is seriously one of the most simple design tools I've ever used. So, yeah, thanks for giving us that little preview.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Showit, so I'm obviously excited to talk about it. And I think you're right. Like a lot of web builders claim that they're a what you see is what you get tool, and so WYSIWYG is what it's called. And so they tell you like how it's going to look on your builder is how it's going to look on the actual site. And it's not necessarily the case.
Mhm.
And, I can't claim that's true for Showit on everything, but I can say that it's much more true than any other web building platform I've seen.